Well, hello there. The release of Minecraft 1.19 is just around the corner, or if you're watching this in the future has already come out, in which case, let me know how it is, leave a comment. And with the release of 1.19 comes a whole host of new features like the Deep Dark and the Warden and other stuff that I'm forgetting about. But one of my favorite features is the introduction of the Mangrove Swamp. It's a very cool biome with a lot of atmosphere, and with any cool biome that has a lot of atmosphere, people are going to want to build bases. And that's what this is. Welcome to a build tutorial where I teach you how to build a Mangrove Swamp starter house like the one behind me. You won't build this one exactly, but I'm going to guide you through the process so that you can build one just like this in your own world. As this is meant to be a starter base, there are a few restrictions on build materials that we'll be using for this build. First of all, no nether materials, as the nether is not really technically the starter place to build, you know what I mean. And same with end materials. And also, for the sake of this video, I'm not including any deep slate or deeper materials. So no deep dark materials, no deep slate. Everything in this build should be something that you can acquire on day 1, or maybe 2, maybe 3. It should be pretty easy. That's the point. You'll notice in the video there are chapters describing each step of the process of how we're going to build something like this. We're not going to build this one, but I'm going to teach you how to build one like it. So let's get started, shall we? First, let's talk about materials that we will be using. It's pretty simple. We're going to be using granite and dripstone, packed mud, all variants of mangrove logs and woods, and same with stripped oak. We're going to be using a lot of stripped dark oak and mangrove. And then remember your basic necessities for decoration, like your beds and your anvils and your chests and campfires and lanterns and moss and flowers and flowering azalea. That's pretty much it. Step 1 of your build is going to be planning and structuring. I'm going to do this in terracotta blocks so that it's easier to see and track, but you can use any blocks. You can even use the mangrove logs that you'll eventually be using for your actual build, or the mud bricks. With your materials, you're going to start by laying out several basic shapes. In fact, it's so basic that you could call them squares or rectangles. Literally, that's it. You just need to lay out several rectangles that will form the structure of your build. I'm doing 2 here. I would recommend doing anywhere between 2 to 5. I think that will make an interesting build. Of course, each additional box that you add is going to be another whole building that you have to construct, so each box adds more complexity and time. You could maybe start with 2 and build up more as you get more materials, but for now we're going to start with 2. 2 or more is pretty much essential for an interesting shape. If we only had 1 box, it would look really boring, so don't do 1 box, do more boxes. Add boxes. Boxes are good. Over here I laid out some blocks that will remind me that I want to make a little farm over here, or a garden. Just a reminder from me. Once you've laid out your basic shape, it's time to start framing. So it's important to remember that as you're laying out your shapes, these blocks are going to be the actual walls, and this is your interior space. So if you're trying to build a big, spacious area, remember that these blocks take up a lot of room. So this is all you have to work with. Once you've laid out your shapes, it's time to start framing them up in blocks. So you're going to start by putting mangrove planks, or wait, what are these called? Logs, on the corners of each part of your rectangle. If you have a rectangle that intersects with the side of another one, that's actually important, and you don't need to put a mangrove log there because you're going to have a wall here. But it's important to have these touching so that you can actually go between your boxes. Or if you wanted, you could have them separated and build little pathways between, but this is what we're doing for this one. So you put mangrove logs on each corner, and then you're going to start doing the walls. It's also important to have framed out and planned where you're going to have the floor level. So since we're in a swamp, we're going to have our build sort of elevated. So this is the floor level, actually right here. So there's going to be stairs that lead up to the floor level on both sides. But if you have an elevated floor like we do here, it's important to plan out where that is, because that's also going to dictate how tall you need to go with your roof. Once you put in some of the mangrove log pillars, I want you to take a step back and look at the shape of your build. It's time for you to decide how tall you want the roofs to be. More importantly, which block is going to be higher than the other. If you want an interesting looking build, you do not want the roofs of your build to be the same exact height. So I'm going to have this orange and yellow one be a little taller. I'm going to have the roof probably be about there, and then this one be about right there. Now is a great time to frame out your roofs, or roofs, however you want to call it. I don't care. I'm going to show you 2 different designs. This first one is very simple. It's just a slab hanging over the edge of your frame, followed by a log, and then 2 slabs, log, slab, log, slab. It's basically just log and slab all the way until you kind of reach the middle, and then you go down the other way. And of course, it's important to have the 1 block overhang just so you add more depth. This roof design is a little more complicated, but really, it's not. This one's very simple. You start with 1 slab on the top of your frame, and then you go 1 block out, one slab up, and then 1 slab out. Then you have this 2 slab platform right there. From there, you can just work backwards and say, okay, I'm going 2 slabs over and then reducing my height by 1 slab. So 2 slabs, down 1, 2 slabs, down a half slab. And you just extend that across the entire width of your build. You will lose a lot of height, so it's important to take that into consideration when you place your floor level and you decide how tall these frames are going to be, because you're decreasing the height of your roof, so you're not going to have as much height in your room. I think that makes sense, right? Once you have your roofs framed out, it's time to fill in your frames all around with the mud blocks and the roof material. Filling out this roof design is very easy. You just take the blocks that you framed it with and extend them all the way back. Filling out this one is a little more complicated because you don't use the dark oak, you actually use cherry. Wait, no, this isn't cherry. This is mangrove. You take the mangrove planks and you generally place them about a half slab above wherever they are in correlation to the frame. So if the frame is here, if you're building here, you put the half slab there. If you're building here, you can actually put a full block right there and just have it one half slab up. This is not a hard and fast rule though, and actually these roofs, these style roofs, benefit from looking a little messy, so you don't have to follow the rules. Maybe you have a flush block right there, or you have one tall block right there. Point is, it doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be filled in. Another important thing to note, I include some stripped mangrove logs for texture in this part of the build. I think it just is a nice step to do now rather than having to worry about it later. I will talk more about texturing later in the video though. In addition to filling out your roofs, you can also fill out your walls. This is a very easy process. You just take some mud blocks and go along the rectangle that you made all the way up to the roof. If you come into a situation where, like right here, we have the roof intersecting with the wall takes priority because the wall holds up the roof, right? So you wouldn't have the roof cut into the wall. It just doesn't make sense. You just take these mud blocks and you put them all the way up to the top and all the way down to the bottom of the ground. Now, an important note here is if you want to save yourself some time, you can skip to the part of the video where I talk about detailing and texturing. Check the chapters. I'm not going to talk about it right now just to not muddy the waters, pun intended. As you're filling out the walls though, it's important to remember where you put the floor level. So I'm going to grab some dark oak slabs and actually put in the floor right now too. Ta-da! We have some ugly boxes, but it's all right. The biggest portion of the build is done, and now it's time to do the detail stuff. On to chapter 2, texturing and shaping. Let's talk about shaping first, shall we? So you can see I've added a staircase here to bring us up to the floor level of the bigger box, and then in here I've punched a hole in the room to know that we need to have a little staircase up here to get to that level. Pretty simple. Shaping is the process in which we basically take this box and add shape interest, is what we're gonna call it. That is a patented term. Please respect the patent. So I look at a wall like this and I think, okay, before we had this, look at it. It's flat, it's boring. Let's add a little structure beam. And if we wanted, we could even add another one right here going up to the roof. It could even extend into the roof, and there we go. That's shaping. We're gonna kind of repeat that process all along and I'll show you what I mean. There's also another process called window making, where you punch out some windows. For this design, I like to use fences for windows. I think it just is a little more authentic than perhaps glass, but you're welcome to use whatever you'd like. I also like to frame the windows with some trapdoors, just like this maybe, and sometimes I do it like that where it goes over the window, and sometimes I'll put them on the sides of the window. You may think, oh, it looks weird because there's fences, but you know what? Doesn't matter. No one will care. Planter boxes are also a great way to add shape interest to your build. Just add some moss with some trapdoors framing it, or you can also use grass along places of your build that are very flat. This wall is going to be especially interesting to decorate, so I'll show you what I do with that specifically. But essentially, you repeat this process all along your build. Fill in the blank spaces with things like windows, or planters, or hanging lanterns, and remember that asymmetry is usually your friend. Now, I told you this wall was going to be interesting, but in reality, it's actually not that complicated. To make this wall interesting, you add more shapes. So we added a little window, we added some stairs underneath the supporting log there, and I did the same for over here. That's a nice little technique that you can add just to soften edges pretty easily. And then we added a staircase going into the floor here so that we have another entrance. Now, it may have been tempting, if you're doing this yourself, to just put a staircase right here, right? Going straight down, because that's the most efficient way to get inside, right? You just have two stairs and then you're inside. However, it's not the most visually interesting method we can take. Adding a little turn just fills up more space and provides a layer of depth. So now if you look at the build, we have a very nice asymmetry happening between the staircase on that side and the staircase on this side, and it kind of draws us into the middle of the build here, which is good. We want visual balance in our builds. This is getting a little technical. I know you're probably not here for that, but it's interesting to consider. Now, I want a little more happening with the front face of this build, so I'm actually going to take out this supporting log and throw in some moss or grass and add another planter. So that's the basics of shape interest. There's a million things that you can do, and sometimes it can go too far, but in reality, it's very simple stuff. You just add little bits where things kind of make sense, and sometimes they also don't make sense, but they look visually interesting, so that's enough for it. But maybe this makes sense to you. Maybe you need a support beam there. Maybe you need a planter here or a support beam there. Just add things to your build. Don't be afraid to try things out, and you'll probably have to redo a lot of them, but that's okay. It's part of the fun, right? I actually think there's too much red happening here, so I'm going to knock out these beams here. It's a process. Now let's talk about texturing. Texturing is very important, especially when you have large, flat spaces like these mud brick walls. You've probably heard of texturing before, but we're going to go through it really quick, you and I. Texturing is when you take blocks of a similar color range or palette and you add them in a random assortment. There's also something called gradients, which is like texturing, but with a pattern of darkness and to lightness or whatever. I don't know the exact official terms, but where you go in a sequence of dark to light, or light to dark. We're not going to be gradients because gradients usually work better on very tall builds or very large builds. This doesn't really need it. We will apply a little bit of logic to our texturing. So we're going to go up to these brick walls, and on the more bottom portions of the wall, we're going to place more of this dripstone, right? So the dripstone will primarily be focused along the bottom, and we're just going to kind of place it randomly. And like I said earlier, if you want to do this while you're building the actual wall itself, you might save yourself some time later. And then in addition to the dripstone, we're going to add packed mud. Now the packed mud we'll usually do in splotches of 2 or 3, and the dripstone will also sort of follow that pattern. You don't want to do too much, but you also don't want to do too little. It's just a balance, and you're not going to really know exactly how to do that balance until you try it for a little while. But once you do it, it'll come pretty naturally. This is a really big wall, which I'm not going to decorate for this tutorial, but you would probably want to do more than just texture it if this were your actual build. And this is what finished texturing would look like. You may think texturing up close looks gross or weird, and you might be right about that, but from a distance, texturing can do wonders for your build. It can help provide visual interest when shape and detail fail you. Now let's go into Chapter 3, Detail. In this chapter, we're going to focus on character and small scale, things that really bring your build to life. This includes things like lights and flowers, where you put the flowers. Now, we've already done a little bit of detailing. The difference between what we're calling shaping and detailing is like the difference between having a flower here. This box here is shape, and the flower is detail. Speaking of flowers, it can be very important what kind of flowers you put inside of a planter. For example, if we put this blue orchid here, blue orchids are my favorite flower. I would never put it in this build because it contrasts too much. The color doesn't mix well with the red hues that we're using, the brown and red hues that we're using with the mangrove wood and the mud bricks. So instead I'm going to do something with red hues, maybe a red tulip, or maybe a pink tulip. Hanging ferns are another great detail you can add to your build for some character, especially in a swamp. So detail is really what's going to give your build character and bring it to life. This is going to take the longest, it's going to be the most awkward and confusing, and it's also the hardest to teach. But if you put enough time into it, it can really transform your build. Detail is also going to include our Chapter 4, which will be Terraforming and Interior. So let's get to that because that will really wrap this build up. Chapter 4, Terraforming and Interior. I include terraforming and interior as part of detail, but they're on a much different scale, and they're kind of opposites. Terraforming deals with the outside of your build, bringing it to life there, and interior deals with the inside of your build. Both of these are crucial to bringing your build to the next level. This is a nice looking build, but you'll see it really transform once we add both those things. Now with terraforming, it's important to have a plan. So for this build, we're going to have a little path going from the staircase to that staircase and then down into the swamp. We're going to turn that little corner into more developed, probably a little garden. We're going to add some planters here with actual crops, and maybe a retaining wall along this coast here with some granite, like we did over here, as evidenced with this. I really like this wall, especially with the dark oak contrast. It looks nice. All right, so you can see I've added a path from the stairs along going and just sort of extending into the forest. Of course, you could take that wherever you wanted. Now, to make the path, we use granite and polished granite along with dried mud or whatever, packed mud, and also dripstone. And then wherever there's a patch of grass, rather than remove the grass, I decided to embrace it and just turn some of it into grass paths. And you'll notice as the path sort of deteriorates, we get more and more dried mud, and it starts to sort of be interspersed with the regular mud. This is just sort of common sense. The dried mud would be on the outside, and then the granite would be on the inside, because it's the granite that's actually put down, and the dried mud is sort of a product of just walking on the mud all the time. And then I added these planters over here, just a very simple design, framed by some farmland, framed by some trapdoors, with a little water source here with 2 stairs. And now we're going to transform the ground around the planters into some more granite and actually developed, because if you think about it, we're in a swamp. What is the last thing you want to be walking on all day? Mud. So we're going to remove the mud and develop it and make it look nice. Ta-da! Just like that, we have a fully developed farm area. So you can see we've just replaced the ground around with the granite. Now this might be a little too pink for your tastes. I get it. You can also replace more of it with the packed mud. That works just fine. And also I would replace some of this with packed mud and sort of faded out into the mud around the area, but it works. It's nice. It's developed now, and it makes more sense because nobody wants to walk on this squelching, disgusting stuff. Now I'm going to add something right here, and we should be done basically with the terraforming. Would you look at that? Just added some moss and some flowering azalea, and also a cauldron of water and a little composter. That should not be there. Get out of there, moss. And now it looks like a little manicured lawn, sort of. Great, we are almost done with our build. The last step is, of course, the interior. Interiors can be a challenge because you need to balance function with looks. If you're making this for yourself, you can do whatever interior you want. If you're making it to show off to friends, you can do something that will look a little nicer. The big deal about interiors is that it needs to work for your brain. If you think something doesn't make sense, like you don't understand why your chests are on this wall because you always enter from over here and that's where you want your chest to be, then do that. But the important thing is to not leave empty rooms because that's boring. And we are not boring, right? Say it with me. We are not boring. Now, these rooms are pretty small. I think the first thing I would do if these were bigger would be divide them up into smaller rooms, but since these rooms are already small, we don't really need to divide them up anymore. Instead, I'm going to take a checklist of things that I need for a starter base. I need chests, I need crafting, I need smelting, and I need a place to sleep. Those are the most essential things. So let's add those. Okay, I have finished the interior. Let's take a look and I'll walk you through what I've done. So coming up, let's get rid of this. See, this is what I'm talking about. No moss here, thank you very much. I'm actually going to replace one of those with that. Great. Okay, so walking in, what do we got? We got our bed, check. A jukebox, essential. Little carpet to add some interest to the floor. Some storage here with these barrels. I noticed that we had a lot of vertical space, so I added an upstairs with an enchanting table. No, there's no room for bookshelves. You know what? This is a starter base. Leave me alone. In the other room, the bigger room, we have our storage. We have our crafting table. We have a loom and just things that you might need, like a stone cutter and anvil. Ender chest if you ever get that. Cake with a candle on top of it, of course. A little flower pot with a propagule that we got from the first tree we cut down, because you're going to have to cut down a lot of trees, by the way. It's awful. I hate it. There's lots of furnaces. There's these blast furnaces. Very nice. And then another carpet for visual interest on the floor. If you are ever doing a storage room, please do not just lay out your chests like this. Okay? Don't do it. Add some support. Make it look a little more supported, like it belongs there. All right, it's not that hard. And it is important to remember that when you have chests going up against the roof, you need to have slabs or stairs there. Otherwise, you won't be able to open the chest. And of course, down here in the basement, we have another cake with a candle. I didn't really finish this room because I already put everything that I felt like a starter base needed in these other rooms. It's very easy to be very efficient with interiors. It just takes a little bit of creativity. And that's basically it. If you follow the steps in this tutorial, you should be able to build a starter base in a mangrove swamp very similar to this, or very similar to this one, which is a little bit bigger and a little more complex. Now, you may need to rewatch sections of this video to catch everything. I went through things pretty fast. That's why the chapters are there. I hope you enjoyed, and I can't wait to see pictures of your builds. I'm not sure how I'll see them, but I'll see them. Hope you enjoyed. Goodbye. Oh, and I forgot to mention, if you want to see more build tutorials like this in the future, let me know, and let me know what kind of builds you would be interested in seeing a tutorial for. I'm open to anything. Okay, goodbye for real.